everybody, and welcome back to Wednesdays with Watson. And boy, are you in for a treat today, because it is truly Wednesdays with Watson. I have here in front of me my fellow podcaster and friend, Markus Watson. He has been on the Wednesdays with Watson podcast before, but if you are listening to this on a Wednesday, you are listening to Wednesday Double Watson. Markus, welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. Sorry, I stole the name, by the way.
Oh, no, that's okay. Thanks, Amy. Glad to be here with a fellow Watson.
That's right.
No relation as far as we know, right? But
no relation. Although you do have some German roots, and
I
I'm
do.
German, and
I
so
do.
your name being spelled very German as well.
Yeah, right.
First name, and so who
That's
knows?
true.
Maybe we should look into that.
Who
Well,
knows?
Markus, as I mentioned, has been on the podcast before, and he will allude to some of what he talked about before. But that was a bit of it wasn't just him and I. It was a group podcast, and so he wasn't able to dive as deeply into the story that he will dive in today on that podcast. But he just did something amazing that he's going to tell us about as it pertains to this. But by way of introduction, Markus is the interim pastor of Mount Soledad. I hope I said that right.
Yeah, Soledad. That's
Soledad,
right.
Presbyterian Church in where is that in California?
It's in San Diego.
San
Kind
Diego,
of in La
California.
Jolla. Yeah.
He's a Chargers fan, and we forgive him for that. But I'm just kidding.
No, I'm not.
Chargers
I
fan?
used to be, and then they abandoned us and went to Los
Then
Angeles.
they went to
And
Los
now
Angeles.
our family hates the Chargers.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah. Well, I'm a Jaguars fan, and we
Padres.
hate baseball. Yeah. I'm a Jaguars fan, and we hate both those teams from California. All the
Gotcha.
teams from the West Coast.
Yeah.
Because we always lose. But
great.
anyway, living in San Diego, California, married with, I believe, 3 children. He is also a podcaster. His podcast is Spiritual Life and Leadership, and he partners Fuller University, which is kind of cool. That's your alma mater, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Fuller Seminary. Yeah.
So guys, we are amongst people who know what they are talking about. So as my listeners know, Markus, we are in the middle, not in the middle, we're in a season of talking about forgiving trauma makers. And this series was really born out of when I looked back at the numbers. And, as podcasters, we're not supposed to be looking at numbers, but I do.
Yeah.
When I went and looked back at the numbers, the episodes that we did on forgiving trauma makers are among some of the most listened to. And so I decided after much prayer to do a whole season on it, because there are every single one of us are taught forgiveness in a different way. We come from different generations, different denominations if we go to church. And everybody's journey is different because the way we're built, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to really take a cross section of the population and talk about different types of things that we need to forgive, and men, women, different personality types, mostly Christian. I don't know. I haven't completed the season yet, but talking to people about their forgiveness journey. And the timing of this interview happens to be quite impeccable, because I keep alluding to something that you just did, which we're going to get to in just a second. But you are a pastor, and so don't think for a second that I'm not going to take advantage of that knowledge as well. But our core verse, Markus, for this series, season really is not a series, is Ephesians 4:32. Be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, compassionate, forgiving one another, even as Christ has forgiven you. I often pair it with that verse in Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus says, if you don't forgive, I won't forgive you. We all know the verse in Colossians, I believe it's 3:13, that we are to forgive as we have been forgiven. And so many people struggle with that because we are mere mortals. We're mere human beings who get incredibly hurt and want to hold on to things. And forgiveness is hard for everybody. And so what I wanted to do was, make sure that I always mention that, like, Ephesians 4:32 is not a suggestion. It is a commandment. And that's sometimes hard to swallow, especially if we've been wronged, as you have, and you'll tell us that story today. But what I'm asking everyone, with that in mind, knowing that I'm not going to go rogue and say, there are some things that we don't have to forgive. I have to stand before God one day. I'm sitting behind this microphone, and I have to be faithful with that message, and that it doesn't matter what happened to you, you have to forgive. And whatever way that looks for you, and whatever time frame that is for you, you have to do it. It is not a suggestion, it is a commandment. That being said, though, Forgiveness might mean something different to everybody. And this is a question that I'm asking to everybody before we dive into your story.
Yeah.
What does forgiveness mean to you?
Well, I think one of the best definitions or explanations of forgiveness that I heard. Well, let me explain it. So when someone's hurt you, it's almost like they incur a debt to you, and you feel like you owe me for what you did to me, right? You hurt me, and now you owe me, and so to say, I forgive you is to say you don't owe me anymore. And then another way of thinking about it is, sometimes holding the grudge or the resentment, the anger, the bitterness is like lugging a boulder around with you. And then forgiveness is just a way of saying, I'm not going to carry this boulder around anymore. So those are kind of two ways that I think about forgiveness. Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of people use the debt. And that's something that we can all understand, right? Like I mentioned a couple of weeks ago about that parable of the debtor that was set free, and then he then in turn did not forgive what was, and so I think all of us can think of forgiveness in that way. Is like, imagine that you have a $25,000 debt to Johnny Smith, and you don't have $25,000, and Johnny has done all kinds of things for you. You owe him $25,000, but you can't pay it. Think of how you would feel if Johnny came to you and said, "Hey, Marcus, that $25,000 taken care of, no problems, never going to speak of it again."
Yeah. That'd be amazing.
Right? That's amazing. And that's what we do for people when we forgive them. Now, it's not always appropriate to tell them that we forgave them, because
sometimes they think, I don't owe you $25,000. What, I didn't do anything, or I didn't do anything wrong. What I did was appropriate or right, and then that creates a whole other.
Right. And then it's just compounding.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that we all can feel what that sense of relief would be if the bank called right now and said, "Hey, you don't have to pay your mortgage anymore. Somebody paid it for you." Right. So I think that we all can frame forgiveness in that. Well, you were on the Wednesdays with Watson podcast, my first year, talking about a very difficult time in your life. And so I don't know which angle you want to go at this, because you also did something just recently very cool. And so maybe tell us what you did, and then tie it in. You're a podcaster, you're a storyteller, you know where I'm headed with this. And so I want to give the microphone to you. Tell my listeners what you just experienced and how it ties into forgiveness.
Okay. Yeah, so I just did 100 miles of the Camino de Santiago, which is actually just a small part of it. The whole thing is about 400 to 500 miles, depending on which route you take. I did the Portuguese route. So started in Ponta de Lima, Portugal. Interesting. The oldest town or village in Portugal, built by the Romans. That was kind of cool. And then from there, just kind of walk. You follow. It's so cool. There's just these yellow arrows along paths and sidewalks and streets and trails, and you just follow the yellow arrows and you just keep going. And it makes life it makes life easy when all you got to do is follow the yellow arrows. You don't have to make any decisions. And if you do get off track, you're like, oh, wait, I missed the yellow arrows. Let me go back and find the yellow arrows. And you find the yellow arrows and you keep going. Anyway, so it's this wonderful, almost like a metaphor for life, the Camino de Santiago. And so the destination is Santiago de Compostela is the town or the city. And it's where there's a phenomenal, incredible cathedral there. And it's, believed to be where the bones of St. James, not the brother of Jesus, but the apostle, the son of Zebedee, his bones are supposedly kept there. And so anyway, it's been this pilgrimage journey that people have been doing for, over 1,000 years. My understanding is that when the Crusades were happening, people used to do pilgrimages to Jerusalem. That became too dangerous. And so then people started doing this pilgrimage to Santiago instead, and have been doing it for 1,000 years now, or whatever it's been. And so anyway, it was such a good experience. Did it with a group of other pastors and leaders, and sometimes we walked alone, sometimes we walked together, built some great friendships, and that was part of the very healing experience that this was for me. So I'll kind of put it now in context of everything in my life. I first heard about the Camino back in maybe 2017. A friend of mine had heard about it, and he's like, "Oh man, let me tell you about this thing I just discovered." And then there's a movie about the Camino called The Way, starring Martin Sheen, directed by his son Emilio Estevez. Just a really great movie that sort of helps you kind of see the inner life transformation that happens when you walk, just by and the experiences that you have just by walking. And so this was something that I'd been wanting to do since about 2017 because I was in need of a lot of healing and so now let me explain why why I need that. And this is what I shared with you on an earlier episode. So I'll keep it kind of short. But I had been a pastor at a church here in San Diego. Was there for about 7.5 years. Everything was great for all of that time, and then went on a sabbatical. And about 2 weeks into that sabbatical, our executive presbyter here, so kind of the leader of our regional presbytery, contacted me and said that someone had accused me of having a problem with pornography. And so I said, "Okay, well, what do you need to do?" And he said, "Well, I need to do a forensic analysis on your laptop." So that was fine. You can have my laptop. And so I gave it to him, and my laptop was owned by the by the church, and so that's why, one of the reasons they could say we need to look at it. Anyway, that led to an investigation. During which time the allegations escalated from mere pornography to child pornography. Now, full disclosure, it's not like I've never looked at pornography in my life. But I have been in an accountability relationship for a long time with a friend, another pastor in our presbytery here, and have had accountability software, on all my devices and all of that. So anyway, so I wasn't worried about it as far as that goes, but these allegations just kept coming and escalating, and it was just a really, really dark time for me. I was afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what people were going to think about me. Would I lose my job? And I did eventually lose my job. And it was a really dark time. It was also a very transformative time. I had a moment where I was sitting on my patio, having just spent some time in one of the Psalms of Lament. I spent a lot of time in the Psalms of Lament that summer, and then just sort of sitting silently. And I started thinking about all of the worst case scenarios that could happen if it looks like I would be guilty of this, right? If it looked like the allegations were true. So I thought, gosh, I could lose my job, and I did eventually. I could lose my reputation, right? All of my friends and colleagues and family even maybe would think these things about me. I could lose my ordination, right, as a pastor in our denomination. I could lose my family, I thought. I don't think I would have, but my mind was spiraling into all those worst case scenarios. I could become a registered sex offender, I thought, if it looks like I'm guilty of this. And I just thought, I can't imagine living my life as though people thinking this thing about me that wasn't even true, right? And then I thought I could go to prison. And so, like, just kind of sinking deeper into this despair, this feeling of despair. And then I had this sort of picture in my mind of me sitting in a prison cell, having lost everything, having lost everyone in my life. And then it was like I sensed God saying to me, "Yeah, Marcus, they might take everything from you, but they can never take my love from you." And I was like, "Oh, right, that's the one thing no one can ever take from me." And that was a transformative moment for me. I almost think of my life as before and after that, right? That moment. Before that, I knew about God's love, right? And I had experienced it, and I taught about it. I preached about it, right? But I didn't really know it until that moment when when I realized that's the only thing ultimately in the end that matters, and the only thing that I have that can never be taken away from me. Anyway, so that was one of the gifts of that whole experience. It doesn't mean it wasn't easy after that. It continued to be hard. But this first investigation, came to a conclusion. It was determined that there was nothing there to support the allegations that had been made. But the investigation that was done didn't follow our procedures in our Presbyterian tradition, the way we do things. And so the person who made those allegations had the opportunity then to file formal allegations again. And this time they followed the process. And so it led to a second investigation, which was really frustrating at first that I had to go through it again. But it was actually a good thing because now it was on the record, right? I was exonerated again. And then, so all of this is over the course of about 6 or 7 months. Exonerated at the end of 2016. And then in early 2017, the same person made the same allegations again to the elders at our church. And so it didn't lead to another investigation, but it led to a conversation. We met about it, and I shared everything that had happened. My friend, who was my accountability partner, came and said, look, I can give you a year's worth of accountability reports if you'd like. Our executive presbyter came and said, this is a closed matter. We've done 2 investigations already. And so our elders, said, basically, Marcus, you have our trust as our pastor. And I thought, great, this is, oh, good. Maybe this is over now. And maybe it would have, except that one of the elders, for whatever reason, decided to believe the allegations and started calling people in our church saying that Pastor Marcus is into child pornography. And so that was, when we found that out, that was happening, I was just like, well, I think my time here is done. And so a few weeks after that, we had a congregational meeting, and there was a motion to dissolve the relationship with me, and it passed by a margin of 2 votes, right? So it wasn't an overwhelming majority by any means, but I think enough people felt like, well, we don't really know what's going on, so maybe we're better off getting a new pastor, But so it
I,
was. Oh, go ahead.
oh, well, I just wanted to insert something here. I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember whether it was on my show or another show that I heard
Mm-hmm.
you talk about, because
Mm-hmm.
every time, and it's for those people who are watching on YouTube, you can see
Mm-hmm.
just in your breathing pattern the
Mm-hmm.
pain that this still invokes
Mm,
in some ways.
yeah, yeah,
But I remember you saying to me, and I wonder if this is some of what you processed on your 100-mile journey. But I remember you saying,
yeah.
and again, I can't remember which podcast it
Mhm,
was on, but at one point you couldn't sleep, and you went out, and everyone in the house was asleep or gone or something, and you
mm,
went into the living room or the basement or somewhere,
mhm. Yeah.
and you put a blanket over your
Yeah,
head
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
you
yeah.
felt such shame.
Yes.
Tell
Well,
me about
so
that a little bit.
that was actually a different experience, but it brought
Was
up
it?
a lot of the things. So it was after I rear-ended a car, and
Oh,
I
that's
felt
right.
so it was a small thing in that regard, but it brought up all of those feelings of shame and unworth. And it was like it wasn't just a light little fender bender. I kind of really smashed into the back of somebody's car, and I felt terrible about it. But yeah, but I went, and I couldn't sleep that night because I felt so bad about it. And I went downstairs in the middle of the night, and there was a blanket there on the couch, and I just sort of pulled the blanket over my head, and I was like, why am I doing this? Why do I keep pulling the blanket over my head? Oh, this is shame. That's what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling shame. And so um well, I had a great therapist at that time, and we learned what is it, somatic experience. Do you know
Mhm.
that, where you just
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of feel the feelings in your body? And so I did that. I just, all right, well, let me just hide under the covers then, and let me just feel it. And then eventually, after 20 minutes, half an hour, I was like, all right, I don't feel the need to hide anymore. And so
It's very effective. Somatic experiencing is very
yeah.
effective. Um, for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I want to ask
Mm-hmm.
you, and this might lead into what the Lord showed you on that 100-mile
Mm-hmm.
walk. I'm sure He showed you a lot of things, including
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there were probably a few times like was I thinking? And
Mm-hmm.
I laughed one time when I literally followed the whole thing on Facebook when you were
Oh,
walking
cool.
around. I would laugh at your socks on the
Yeah.
top.
Yeah.
You're drying out,
Yeah.
and I was just
Trying
like,
out.
he's for real Rogan it out there,
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things that was just impressed upon me is because I've known you now for a couple of
Mm-hmm.
years. We're in
Mm-hmm.
Christian Podcasters Association together, and we've been on
Mm-hmm.
each other's shows. And
Mm-hmm.
I adore you. I
Mm-hmm.
have the utmost respect for you. You're smart and all the things. And all you were doing was living your life for God, raising your family,
Yeah.
pastoring your church. And so my question to you may be a little bit different than it is to other people. Did you
Mm-hmm.
ever find yourself in a position where you, and this is going to seem like a weird
Mm-hmm.
question,
Mm-hmm.
needed to forgive God? Was there moments like, dude, I am just standing in the pulpit doing what you've called me to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not one,
Mm-hmm.
not two, but three
Yeah.
times. And if I'm not mistaken, that ended up being a picture of your child in a diaper or something on your laptop.
Oh yeah, right. It was just my kids goofing around. Well, this is what escalated the investigation. The allegations came kind of out of nowhere. But they did this analysis, and there are kids of pictures of my kids in their underwear. So the guy doing the analysis said, "Well, it's not my decision if this is pornography or not. So I'm going to hand it off to the FBI, believe it or not."
Wow.
Wait, and they concluded this is not pornography, right? So anyway, was I mad at God? Did I have to forgive God? I don't know if I ever thought of it in terms of forgiving God, but I was definitely pissed at God,
Yeah,
if I may say
I
that.
would have been
I
too.
was, yeah, I was like, why? Why are you letting this happen to me? I didn't do anything. And yeah, and I felt a little bit betrayed, and I would say, why aren't you doing anything now? Like now that this thing is in process, why aren't you doing anything about this? I never used the words "I forgive you, God," but in a sense, that's what I had to do. And as I went through this process, I certainly came to understand God's presence with me, even in this dark, dark, dark time. I was mad. I didn't hate God, but I was mad that He wasn't meeting my expectations. I mean, my life had
That's as
been,
real as it gets.
yeah, my life had been pretty good, and so I wasn't used to suffering, you know. But I think, in a sense, I mean, in terms of the why, as far as God is concerned goes, I don't know that I can answer that question. But I think some of the blessings that came out of it was I understand suffering now more than I did before.
Yeah.
I'm more compassionate now than I was before because I get it now. It's not that I didn't care that people suffer. I just didn't really know what it
What it
felt
felt
like
like.
to really suffer. And so yeah, so it's one of those things that I look back on and I'm like, I hope that never happens again, but I wouldn't undo it at this point
Yeah.
if I could.
It's so
Uh,
interesting about traumatic events, and that's what that was. So many people will say that. I even
mhm.
say that, and people look at me kind of cross-eyed
Mm,
because I've been through so much. The I don't know the exchange and the depthness and the deepness
mhm,
that pushes you to. It put like my suffering pushed me a little bit away from God for a minute, but
mm,
at
mhm,
the end of the day, I knew that He was where my help came from,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think
yeah,
that suffering and that
yeah,
beautiful verse in Romans 8, verse
yeah,
18, for I reckon that the
yeah,
sufferings of this time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that will be revealed
yeah,
in you. And I think that when you experience suffering like you have, and like I have, and like almost all of my listeners have,
yeah,
it pushes us into this very deep relationship with God. And I had my own,
mhm,
it does seem weird to say forgive God because we don't forgive
yeah.
God, but I had my
But I
own
get it.
moment. I had
Yeah,
my own moment with that. Is like, okay, I am tired of trying. I'm tired of the toil. Why won't you stop? Why won't you stop with all the fiery darts? Why won't you start? It's like
yeah,
one was my go-to, talking about a psalm of,
yeah,
I'm not sure if that's in the Psalm of Lament or not, but so my next question to you
yeah,
is, did you ever make a transaction of forgiving? Particularly, it sounds like there was one particular troublemaker that just wanted.
yeah. So did I ever forgive them? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So yeah, there was one. one in particular. It was a staff person at our church, and then there was another person who kind of was a member and who kind of helped her kind of make the accusations and all that, and kind of stood with her. Anyway, so forgiveness is super hard. And I have not, in our tradition, when a pastor leaves the church, there's not supposed to be contact between that pastor and the church anymore, because, the idea is let the church move on to the next person and the pastor moves on to the next church. So I have not been in contact with any of those people anymore. But here I had this moment several years ago. I was listening to Pete Scazzero's podcast. Pete Scazzero does emotionally healthy spirituality, and he asked the question. What's that?
A great podcast.
Yeah, for sure. He asked the question in one of his episodes. Do you pray for God to bless your enemies? I think that's what it was. And I was like, nope, I don't. Nope.
Didn't even have to think about it.
Nope. And then I thought, but I guess I should. And so I said, all right, Lord. All right, I'm going to pray for your blessing for my enemies. I don't like praying this prayer, but I'll pray it. Please bless so-and-so. Please bless so-and-so, please bless so-and-so. And it's one of those things where, you go through the motions at first, and sometimes you do something and then your mind and your heart follow the action later. So that's kind of how I thought of it. All right, I'm going to say the words. I don't yet mean the words, but I'll say the words, and then, I'll leave it up to you, Lord, if my heart follows. And so, I would say that my heart has softened for sure over time. And let me also say, I also understand that the person who made these allegations had her own trauma, and I'm sure was projecting something, was triggered by something. And so, I have a little bit, maybe I should have more. I don't know. A little bit of compassion.
Little, yeah, I mean,
little is better than nothing, but I do have some compassion for that. Or at least I can say, okay, I understand, right? Hurt people. And I was hurt and you've been hurt. And so, I think that's probably where that came from. When you understand that, it makes it a little bit easier to forgive, I think. And, when I think about Jesus, who said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, in some ways I get that now, right? She didn't really know what she was doing, because she didn't know the whole story, right? But Jesus knew the whole story. He knew everybody's story, all the soldiers' stories that were crucifying him, all the religious leaders who were accusing him. And when you know someone's story, it makes it a little bit easier to forgive. And so I try to, even if I don't know exactly the story, I do know a little bit of the story, and I try to, hold that. And that makes it easier for me then to forgive.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I know that in my own life, so the two biggest trauma makers in my life are my mom, who abandoned me, and my husband, who made my life a living hell for 12 years. I am way more apt to forgive them. It was easier for me to forgive them because I knew what my mom had been through. So she was a daughter of a 3-star general in the Army, unwanted, not as cool as her brothers, very mistreated as a young child, had dyslexia, which, she was born in 1933. So in those days, that was, you were ostracized, and she made a series of bad decisions. Didn't need to be having children at all. And then my ex-husband, I'm quite confident, was abused in the Catholic Church. And so it does make one's heart a little bit softer when we can enter into their pain. And it also will make our hearts softer when we hurt somebody else. And I was talking to Neil about this morning. When we hurt somebody else and need their forgiveness, you realize somebody just paid the mortgage on my house. I don't deserve that. And
Mhm.
so for us to flip that on its ear and go, I can give that to somebody who
Mm.
can do nothing in return for me.
Mm.
It might, Marcus, just be that thing that turns that trauma into triumph.
Right.
Because I was saying this to somebody yesterday. I want people to look at my life and the way I've handled these situations, the way
Yeah.
I've been wronged, and I want them, and even if those offenders were sitting in front of me
Mhm.
right now, I would want them to look at my life and I would want them to want my Jesus.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And if I acted like I wanted to, like I want, not only do I want you to pay my mortgage, I want you to pay my
Mm.
car off. I want you owe
Yeah.
me big time.
Yeah. Right.
That is not my Jesus,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's why I wanted to do this, because it is
Mm.
impossible for me. And I've spent 2.5 years trying to extrapolate hope from Jesus for my
Mm.
listeners on this podcast who
Mhm.
don't know him.
Mhm.
And I have found that virtually impossible to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there is such freedom and forgiveness. And there's something to be said of living this life of forgiveness. And so I'm really
Yeah.
eager to
Yeah.
know, whether it's related or not, what the
Mhm.
Lord shows you. And that you wrote a beautiful piece
Mm.
on
Mhm. Mhm.
your journey, and which
Mhm.
I'll link in the show notes. But
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about, on those 100 miles. I'm sure this
Yeah.
situation came up a couple
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
What did the Lord show you
Yeah.
on this journey?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, right, this is this Camino is something that I've wanted to do now for about 6 years or so. And and so we started on that first day in Ponte de Lima, and there was a cathedral. Every town had a some kind of a cathedral, some
Oh,
bigger, some smaller. And so we said, oh, let's go, before we start walking, let's go check out the cathedral. And so we went over, and some of us, or maybe all of us, went inside and just sort of sat down. And I sat down and closed my eyes. Well, kind of soaked it in, looked around, yeah. And then I closed my eyes and I said, "All right, Lord, here I am. I've been wanting to do this, ever since." And then I said, "That church," and I got so angry as I said that, and I cussed, and, quietly. Nobody heard me except God, but I was like, "Ever since that church," and then, "F that church," and,
I love it.
yeah, and I was surprised. I mean, I knew, I still had some anger, I knew that, but I felt like a lot of it had been healed and dealt with and processed over the years. Um, and I wasn't expecting for all of that intensity to surface. And so I just I just couldn't sit there anymore. So I got up and I walked out, and some of the guys that I was with were still kind of hanging around and just kind of getting a slow start to the day. There was a cafe, some of them were grabbing a coffee, and I just kind of went over. I said, "All right, I think I'm starting. Buen camino," and that's kind of what you say to people, "Buen camino." And I started walking, and um, I walked fast and I walked alone is kind of how I think about it. I walked fast because I had all this energy, like this, like these calories to burn, so to speak, and I didn't want to sit around. I needed to go, and I wasn't running from anything or running towards anything. I was just going, right. I just had to burn that energy. And then I walked fast and I walked alone. I didn't want to walk with anyone, at least not at that time, right. I just wanted to be alone. I didn't want anyone. I didn't want to chit chat with anyone. I didn't want any other voices speaking into this experience at that time. And so I just walked. And at one point, I caught up with a couple of guys that had gotten ahead of me at some point. And anyway, and it was fine. I walked with them, but there was a part of me that was like, I don't really want to walk with anybody, But yeah, I was a little bit like, oh wait. Um, so that was just for like the last hour of that day. And then the second day, same thing. Like I just wanted to just go and burn that energy. I wanted to be alone. And then about halfway through that second day, it's like something shifted and something released in some way. And I felt like I could slow down a little bit. And I also felt like I didn't want to walk alone anymore. Um, One of the things that I was thinking about in light of that was that, suffering is always an alone experience, even if you have
Yeah,
supportive people around you, they
very
still
true.
don't know what it's like for you
Right.
in that experience, right? And I had supportive people in my thing, but still, like when you get voted out of a church, I mean, like all kinds of suffering, like it's still an alone experience, right?
Yeah. Well, and especially as a
Um,
provider and a husband and
yeah,
a dad and
all of that, yeah, and it attacks you, right, at your sense of self-worth, and so, anyway, so that desire to be alone was just sort of a reflection, I think, of the aloneness of that experience. And then all of a sudden I was like, "Yeah, I don't wanna be alone anymore. I wanna walk with people." And even, over the last 6 years, I've still been engaged in our presbytery, our regional, churches and all that, but there's always been a little sense of, "I don't belong, like, I'm an outsider here." Um, and prior to that, that painful experience, I felt like, oh, when we'd have a Presbyterian meeting, I'm going to see my friends. And
yeah.
after that, even though most of them were supportive and no one did anything against me, it just always felt like I don't quite belong here. And I don't know that, if I'll feel the same way later or not, but it's just that alone feeling. And so being with this group that I was with, um, I just felt like, yeah, I like these people that I'm with, and I want to walk with them. I don't want to be alone anymore. And I shared that with him. We always it was so good. Every evening we gathered in, the hostel that we were staying in, and we would just each person would process a little bit about what they were experiencing that day. And so I shared about my experience, and I told them I don't want to walk alone. So if anybody wants to walk with me tomorrow, let's walk together. And so I did. Every day I walked with someone. We had a couple of alone times, but that was take an hour here and there to walk alone. Anyway, so about 5 days into the walk, I think it was at the end of the fifth or maybe it was the sixth day. We took what was called the spiritual variant of the Camino, and so it's just sort of a little detour that takes you out a couple of days, and it goes through a little town called Armentira, which has a monastery, and we went to they call it a pilgrim's mass, I think, or blessing of the pilgrims, and it's led by some nuns, and they just it was all in Spanish except for the blessing that they said in each of the languages of the people that
Wow,
were
that's
there.
cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. And that was in the chapel, but then the monastery had a cathedral as well, and so we went inside the cathedral, and I sat in there, and I thought to myself, or kind of talking to God, I was like, this feels a lot like that first day. Here I am again, sitting in another cathedral. And then I said, but it doesn't feel exactly the same, right? I didn't have that same intensity of emotion that I had before. And I started talking to God about that church, but I didn't cuss this time. I've referred to it as that. Well, I did, I guess, that effing precious church. um, and it is like something sort of loosened up inside of me and released, and um it, I don't know if all my problems will be gone after this. Probably not completely. I think I think of it like layers in an onion, right? You peel back the layers of healing that you need. Okay, now let's process this layer. Oh, and here's another layer. Let's process this. Oh, I need some healing now in this deeper layer. And so you just kind of keep going deeper and deeper. And so it just felt like at least another layer of healing that happened. And I didn't use the word forgive, but in a way, right, forgiveness is a releasing, right? And that's kind of what
Absolutely.
I felt like
Yeah.
happened, was there was a little bit of a releasing that happened on this trip.
I
And
think it's real is what's so valuable about that and what the way the Lord decided to tell
mhm,
this story is and the onion's a great analogy.
Yeah.
But God heals on his time, right? We know that he's omniscient. We know that he's all powerful, all knowing. And I can even, Marcus, look back at my own life and times when I would have thought, I have this thing licked. I'm
Yeah.
good. God and I are good. I'm
Yeah.
good. I've forgiven, whoever I need to forgive. And then something will happen that,
Yeah.
and in your case, it was just literally getting alone with God, which I think
Yep.
is, I was talking to one of my counselors yesterday, and yes, I did say one of two. And I said, I almost feel like I need an eat, pray, love year. Like that's what your journey following you on Facebook made me think of, was like,
Yeah.
you know what do I really want in life, and what do I need to heal? And so I
Yeah.
think that God invites us
Yeah.
to these opportunities, whether it is quiet time, whether it's an amazing, remarkable experience like that,
Yeah.
whether it's working in a soup kitchen. He invites us to these sacred places where, where it feels like it's only you and him, and it feels like a lesson long overdue, except for
Yeah.
we know that his timing is perfect.
Yeah.
And so, and I read the piece you wrote, and I really hope that you
Yeah.
will expand on it as time goes by, because it's a beautiful piece. I do think that while you didn't use the word forgive, that what you just explained to us is that there are some offenses, and this is a horrible one. This was not only probably what the thing that you could do, the worst thing that you could do to me would be to attack my ministry.
Yeah.
And so for your ministry to be attacked when you have surrendered your life to a ministry,
Yeah.
to me is in its
Yeah.
own category of pain. And then to move forward in the same denomination, in the same
Yeah.
geographical region, the
Yeah.
hits to your pride as a human being and all
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the things, right? And so I
Yeah.
think that what I want listeners to take from this is, if you are still working through an offense that happened 5, 10, 30 years ago, that's okay, as long as you're moving in the direction of obedience.
Yeah.
And what was that direction of obedience for you and for me and for everybody else? And that's a powerful scripture,
Yeah.
to pray for those that despitefully use us, love your enemies,
Yeah. Right.
and pray blessings over them. Like if you can
Yeah.
imagine that song by Carrie Job and Cody Carnes and Elevation Worship, The Blessing.
Uh-huh.
Like, can you imagine for a second? Because I can't. I'm just going to give you a really honest moment right now. If
Uh-huh.
my mom or John Watson was sitting in front of me, I couldn't say, Lord bless you and keep you. May his
Yeah.
face shine upon you. eh, uh, from
Yeah.
generation to generation to
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could not say that to them right now.
Yeah.
Will
Yeah.
I be able to one day? I don't know. But the point here, guys, is if you are discouraged because you have made, and I'm air quoting when I say this, the transaction of
Yep.
forgiveness,
Yep.
very similar to what Marcus
Yep.
did. Counseling is big on this podcast,
Yeah.
and he utilized that during this time. But
Yeah.
his story proves to us more than anything that we are multifaceted, layered
Yeah.
human
Yeah. Yeah.
beings, and so is pain.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
therefore, if you think that what's and listen, we don't compare traumas, we don't compare sufferings, so it doesn't matter what you're going through. If you're having a hard time letting it go, know that there is it may not be 100-mile walk in Portugal
Yeah.
and Spain for you,
Yeah.
but there is an opportunity for you to continue to lean into what God wants you to
Yeah.
learn from it. And in that suffering, as that verse in Romans says, is that suffering that you're going through as you walk through this journey of paying off this other person's debt, paying off their mortgage, and telling them so too. If you are not there yet, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You're not, you're standing before a holy God. He knows your
Yeah.
heart, right?
Yeah. I think about it reminds me of there's that old David Crowder song. I can't remember the name of the song, but the words are, this is all that I can say right now. This is all that I can
Oh, I
give.
love that song.
And in a way, I didn't get it at that time. I'm like, why not give everything? But it's like after this, I'm like, yeah, I get that now. I'll give what I can, but I can't give more than this. And so I think it's also important to remember that there's grace for us
Yeah.
in our
Journey.
in the challenge
Yeah.
we have in terms of forgiveness. God understands. I get it. You can't forgive more than that right now, but uh but I affirm, I recognize, that you are giving all that you can give. Like the widow with the penny, right?
Yeah.
All I can give this little, oh, this is my, doesn't he say that in the song, right?
This is
Yeah,
my
that's
everything.
my everything,
Yeah.
right? This little bit of forgiveness, release, whatever it is that I can give right now, that's my everything, right? And I think God recognizes that, even if there's still some that, I mean, there's more to be given later, more to be given later, but that's my everything right
And
now. Yeah.
what a I love that song. I
Yeah.
wish I could. I think it is. This is my everything, but it's song listeners listen to it. If I could, if I wouldn't break copyright laws, I would put it in here.
Yeah.
But you can hear the pain in his voice, David Crowder's
Mm-hmm.
voice. This
Yeah.
is all that I can say right now. And so, guys, as we near the end of the podcast, if you're in a period of, you know, Amy is spending a whole season on preaching for Ephesians 4:32 to us. She's bringing powerful lessons to her, but that does not compute to me right now. All we need you to do is take one step. We need you to sit down in a pew, very similar to what Marcus did, and said, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I pray blessings on X, and your heart will follow, because your heart will follow, because that's the way Jesus works.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want people out there, Marcus, and this has been a beautiful, unique story comparatively
Yeah.
speaking to the other stories that I've told, because
Mm-hmm.
it does demonstrate that transaction is not a one and done. We're both Gen Xers, and so we were taught forgive and forget. I don't know what millennials and Gen Z how they feel about it, but we know
Yeah.
that you can't forget, that God didn't give. He doesn't command that. He doesn't say that.
Right.
But one of the things that I have said on every episode, and I'll say to you too, and this might be
Mm-hmm.
hard to hear, but that same blood that covers my sin, that covers your sin, covers that lady's sin
Yeah.
that she did against you, covers John
Yeah.
Watson, covers my
Yeah.
mom, covers
Yeah.
Hitler, right?
Yeah.
This is the
Right.
power of the cross. This is the
Yeah.
power of the cross, and the
Yeah.
power of the cross to walk us through these periods of suffering where we have to
Mm-hmm.
forgive in bite-sized
Mm-hmm.
pieces is
Yeah.
okay, because that's the power
Yeah.
of the precious blood that
Yeah.
was spilled for all of us.
Yeah.
And that we don't deserve it. And for some of us, it's hard to get there with that. We don't deserve Jesus dying on the cross for our sins, because
Mm-hmm.
I was a good kid. I was said on a podcast that I did recorded yesterday. I was a good kid, never got in trouble, got put in the hall for talking too much. But by and large, I don't look back on my life and go, wow, I'm just being honest. I've
Yeah.
lived a wretched life, and I don't deserve anything I
Right.
don't deserve the cross. I don't deserve
Yeah. Yeah.
forgiveness. I
Yeah.
know that in my head. I know it in my heart. I know I'm a sinner. But I
Mm-hmm.
think there is a sector of us who have
Mm-hmm.
lived a good life, and I air quote when I
Mm-hmm.
say that,
Mm-hmm.
committed to the cross, committed to the cause,
Yeah.
that when you tell me, well, you don't deserve the blood of Jesus, that's not the
Mm-hmm.
best way to soften my heart
Mm.
to forgive somebody else.
Yeah. Right.
That's not the Jesus I want to follow.
The one who says you don't deserve? Is that what
Right.
you're saying?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
know I don't deserve it, but
Sure.
but but
Yeah.
I don't think if Jesus was on this planet, he'd want that to be on repeat, like
Oh yeah.
play,
That
at every church service. You don't
you
deserve,
deserve it.
or you don't deserve, you don't
Yeah,
deserve.
I mean that's one of the things that came out of my experience was one of my friends my friend who was my accountability partner, just a good friend. In fact, I was supposed to have lunch with him today, but my son got laryngitis, so I'm gonna hold off on that. So anyway, but anyway, he was so faithful to me during that time, and he went to bat for me with people, why are just emails and phone calls and meetings, and then would just care for me personally. And I remember saying to God, why is he doing this? He doesn't have to do all this for me. Right? It's
Right.
taking a lot of energy. And it sort of opened up inside of me a recognition that, oh, I have this sense that I don't deserve to be cared for, to be loved. And then I realized, oh, I also feel
Messaging.
like I don't deserve, I've been telling myself for 30 years, I don't deserve God's love. And by extension, I don't deserve to be loved. And so I spent like the entire next day, I was at the beach and I was just repeating to myself, I deserve your love. I deserve your love, right? Not that I've earned it, but I'm
Right.
worthy of it because I'm
That
a child of
there
God,
it
created
is.
in the image of
There it
God.
is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we need to chain link that messaging.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
he came to die for us because we could not pay for our own sin, but he
Yeah.
did that out of the most pure love ever,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And he himself, before he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He said, pretty much like, why am I here? Please take this cup from me. And it's almost like we see the process of forgiveness when he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then when he gave up the ghost and he said, it is finished. What did that mean? That meant that we could take our time to forgive. It meant that we could take our time to journey towards Jesus, and that, and that all that he requires of us is that we love the Lord our God with all of our hearts and all of our minds. And so our journeys to forgiveness are going to be different. And so messaging is everything. I've talked about that a lot on this podcast, from sexual purity messaging to making sexual abuse victims feel shame, to this kind of messaging who makes us feel like I'm not worthy of this unbelievable gift that Jesus gave me. Do I deserve it? Did I do anything to earn it? Did I buy it? No. But I am worthy of it, because I am the precious daughter of the Most High God.
That's right.
And you are the precious son of the Most High God.
Right.
Well, Markus, I could talk to you forever. I just adore you. I love you. I thank you so much for being on this podcast. And Markus has written a book, guys. I'm going to put it in the show notes called, I love the name of it, Thingification.
Beyond Thingification.
Beyond Thingification. I couldn't read my writing there. Beyond Thingification. He himself has a podcast. Again, I will put in here, Spiritual Life and Leadership. I have a lot of pastor friends and pastors' wives that would benefit from that. You can find him at markuswatson.com. Also, though, I'll put that in the show notes. But here's one thing that I know Markus is going to share my desire with, is we've talked a lot about the star of the story, and Wednesdays with Watson podcast listeners know that that's Jesus. And if you don't know him, this podcast is played. Markus, I still can't get the Antarctica listener. So if you have one, can you message them and say, hey, can you just give her one listen from that continent? So we're on 6 continents. And you might be in a dark room somewhere or on a run in a car going, I want to know their Jesus. If you want to know our Jesus and there's no one around you to tell, all you got to do is right there when you're in your app, there's 2 buttons at the top. One will say contact Amy, the other will say contact Markus. We will be happy. Send us a message. My preferable method is through Instagram, so it doesn't get lost. But I will get on the phone with you and I will tell you about a Jesus who makes all things new and who is making all things new. And this journey that you've gone on, I think you've just begun the process. You literally just got home. And so I'm really interested as to what will come out of this in your writings and your podcasting and all of that. But thank you for teaching my listeners today that forgiveness is not a one and done, and God doesn't hate you if it takes you a minute to get there, right? And you can sit in a church. This book right here is called The North Face of God by Ken Geyer. And it is one of my favorite books. And it is about basically when it's the North Face of God, hope for the times when God seems indifferent, so not but indifferent. And there's a story in this book, and it just reminded me of it when you told me you were sitting in a church where a man would go to a church every day and cuss God, pray God, because his son was very ill. And he prayed and he prayed and he prayed and he prayed, and God was not healing his son. And in anger, the man said, are you ever going to heal my son? And God said, if I don't, will you still love me?
Wow.
And so there are some things that we go through in this life that we have to forgive, that God isn't going to take away for whatever reason that he does. Will we still love him? And guys, will your offenders want your Jesus by the way you act? That's so kind of the litmus test for me. You know? Well, Markus, thank you. I am going to close this podcast as Phil Baker's song closes us out. It's a song called Marked by You. It talks about being marked by Jesus, and that is what we want to be. But I also never leave a microphone or a keyboard without saying these words. And so I speak them over you, my friend Markus, and over all of my listeners today. Know that you are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved. And Markus, especially, I want you to hear today, you are so valued. Thank you for being here today. Guys, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you, Markus, for being here.
Thanks, Amy.
All right, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Take care.
Here I am, you can see that I'm nowhere near where I want to be, but you remain so good.